So, tell me about yourself.
Well, let's see. I'm a retired pilot, and I was a pilot in the Air Force. And I've got a son at Gig Harbor High School, and named Nathan. And so, I'm just living the dream right now as a retiree. It's wonderful.
So you were in the Air Force. What did you do in the Air Force?
Well, I was a C-141 pilot, and at one point I was a management analyst officer. Yeah, I was stationed at Norton Air Force Base in California, and let's see, down in Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona.
And what were your jobs? What did you do in your jobs?
Well, as a pilot, I flew cargo airplanes back and forth to Vietnam, and did the training and that kind of thing. I went through pilot training, of course, first, and then learned to fly C-141s in 1970, and that was pretty much the height of the Vietnam War. So got to go through Hawaii and Guam, and then into Kanina, Okinawa, onto maybe the Philippines, then into Vietnam, and then back.
So you were in the actual Vietnam War?
Well, I guess, yeah, you could call it that. Yeah, we actually, got combat time for the time we spent in Vietnam. So, we generally flew cargo and troops there, and then coming back, we would bring back the expendables, that kind of thing, the things that were broken, didn't work, and that kind of stuff. So
any interesting combat stories?
No, not so much. Every once in a while the winds would change, like at Da Nang or something, and they'd have to go in and spray the jungle down with C-130 gunship fire before they'd allow us to come in and land. But that was about the extent of it. It wasn't, it wasn't real severe for us. We were really well protected. They did the intel first before they would send in a 141 and that kind of thing, and it was really a great job. The worst part of the job, though, was bringing home the fallen troops, and we did a lot of that, and that was kind of a difficult part of the job. For the most part, it was a fairly uplifting job, but that part of it was would take a strain on everybody. I think the entire crew would go back and read off the name off the caskets and say a little prayer for each and every one of them. And unfortunately, they were generally really young people. They were oftentimes people that were 19, 20, 21 years old in that age group. So that was a more difficult part of the job. So, but it was all in all, the training was great. Learning to fly airplanes is what I'd always wanted to do since I was a 14-year-old kid, and the Air Force training was superb. It was probably the best that the world had to offer at the time, with the best equipment. And flying 141s was a little bit like flying commercially, except for the government. And so as a result, I'd always wanted to be an airline pilot, and so it was just a great adventure for me to learn to fly big airplanes and that kind of thing. So.
Okay. So, were you involved in any major combat operations in Vietnam, or?
Not so much in Vietnam. It was interesting that we would fly to Thailand from Vietnam and have to cross Cambodia, and it was interesting that we would fly across Cambodia and see all these mushroom clouds coming up from the desert. From the jungle below, and they were our airplanes that were doing bombing and strafing and that kind of thing. And then it was interesting to come home and read in the paper that we weren't involved in Cambodia at all, which was kind of a surprise. But we stayed pretty much out of it. I know one time there was a Zaire airlift that we got involved in Africa, and the Zaire airlift was kind of interesting because the only place they had to put us up was President Mobutu's personal estate. and it was just a lavish estate that was in ruins basically because he'd been cut off, I guess, from either the Russians or the Chinese or whoever helped build the estate. So it was kind of interesting that they didn't have potable water, and so it was the first and only time in my entire flying career where I was encouraged to drink beer before we went to fly because there was no other source of liquid that you could drink that was not going to make you sick. So we did that, and we worked for the UN, and that was kind of exciting, working for the UN, having UN observers in the cockpit and telling us what to do, and that was pretty exciting. We also flew to Europe and did the usual European tour and that kind of thing. But most of what I did out of Norton Air Force Base was flying from Norton to Vietnam. And occasionally we'd fly to Australia, and occasionally we'd fly to Alaska and Japan and places like that. I did have one great, we had one support mission years ago of supporting the USS Enterprise, which at that time was, I believe it was probably the only world's nuclear aircraft carrier. And it was in Pakistan, and so we had to carry supplies all the way from Norton Air Force Base to Karachi, Pakistan, and that was a pretty interesting flight. I know we flew along the coast of India and from a hardened island called Diego Garcia, which was kind of a top secret island down there, just in the Indian Ocean. And the Indian controllers wouldn't talk to us because we were flying into Pakistan, and they didn't like the Pakistanis, and the Pakistanis didn't like the Indians. So as a result, we basically had no support all the way from this little island, of Diego Garcia up to Karachi. And so that was kind of exciting. But that's just the nature of an Air Force pilot. You pretty much go when they tell you to go, and you try to enjoy yourself doing the job.
So were you involved in any accidents of any sort?
Well, yeah, I brought some stuff along in case you wanted to look it over, but yeah, I had a two-engine failure on takeoff out of Australia. I was a new aircraft commander. I had an instructor pilot flying with me, and the number 3 engine, which is the right inboard engine, had a turbine burst, and that means that the turbine flies to pieces, and the engine's spinning so fast that shrapnel just covered the whole side of the airplane, and it took out the number 4 engine, and all that happened at 638 feet above the ground, which was very, very close, and so unfortunately the cargo caught on fire too, and we were fortunate that none of the shrapnel hit anybody. We had some passengers and crew members down there in the cargo compartment where the fire was, but they weren't hit by it. But we were all suffering from smoke inhalation, things like that. Of course, we had a tremendous loss of power, and we just gotten the gear up, which was fortunate because we probably wouldn't have survived. It was probably one of the Air Force's most critical in-flight emergencies that they'd ever suffered, and actually saved the airplane. We were extremely lucky. I was a new aircraft commander. I had an instructor pilot with me, and the instructor pilot basically took over, but the instructor pilot and I were both friends, and we had just come through training, and he was a new instructor, I was a new aircraft commander, and it allowed us to know some techniques that other people hadn't quite learned, about two-engine failures and things like that. And as a result, we were able to slowly milk up the flaps as opposed to trying to just pull them up and stalling the airplane, and by milking the flaps, we also firewalled the 2 good engines, which destroyed the 2 good engines, the 2 good pylons that they were attached to. And we were able to gain some altitude and some airspeed. And as luck would have it, we lost our bearings because we were in fog and haze, and the airplane was virtually uncontrollable. So interestingly, there was a C-130 crew doing touch-and-go landings at Richmond, Australia, right behind us as we took off, and they were able to see us and the airport by climbing up above us. And to use an Australian term, he said, I see the 141, he's on fire, I don't think he's going to make it, but I'll climb above him and shepherd him in, like he was going to shepherd some sheep, I guess. So he did. He actually climbed up there and gave us headings and got us back to the airport while our crew fought the fire. And the instructor pilot and I both fought to maintain control of the airplane, and we were able to bring it around and land it, and got everybody off, and everybody survived. It's virtually an unsurvivable type of accident. The same accident happened several years later, and the airplane crashed. The only difference with that was that their cargo was paint, and that caught on fire and created a much bigger fire than our cargo, which was it was actually household goods for a secret agent in Woomera, Alice Springs, Australia, that we were carrying his household goods down there. So it was pretty exciting for a while. It gave us some notoriety and made us all proud because we'd done our jobs,
So when you were in the Air Force, what was your final rank?
Final rank was a major, and I spent 1968 to 1979 in the Air Force on active duty. And then I decided to leave the Air Force, and I joined the Air Force Reserve, got a job as a civilian employee of the Air Force Reserve, and I think I made major on active duty, and then I went to the reserves and spent a little over 6 months there before I got hired on an airline, and I continued to work as a reservist, flying the 141 and also flying for the airline. And I did that until 1985, and then I decided it was just too much. So I left the Air Force and took an honorary retirement from the Air Force. So then I went to work full-time for the airline, and I retired from the airline in 2006. Yeah.
So did you, while in the Air Force, did you get any special awards? Anything that...
Well, for the Zaire Airlift deal, we all got air medals, which was nice. That's not a real high award or anything, but we also got air medals for the two-engine failure in Australia. So those were pretty nice, and there were a lot of fun times. Sometimes you didn't know the full extent of what you were doing until years later. I know one example, flew into the island of Eniwetok a couple of times, and didn't really know what we were doing. They had a big load of cargo, and we'd take a big load of cargo out and everything. And a few years after I got out of the Air Force, I got a nice letter from the community of Eniwetok, an island in the South Pacific there. And Eniwetok is one of the places where they had the nuclear testing for the United States years ago. And it thanked me for putting myself in harm's way by going down to this highly radioactive island and helping to aid the people of Eniwetok. And of course, I don't think it was really radioactive or anything or a big problem, but it was nice that, we didn't know what we were doing, and we were doing our job just getting the airplane there and getting it back out, and we didn't realize that we were really helping people quite that much. But they were very grateful because these islanders were getting their island back for the first time in, maybe 30 years or something, or 20 years.
So, how long were you in the service, like, including as reserves?
Well, I guess including the reserves, I was in the service about 14 years. Yeah, and so, I probably should have stuck it out, but, there were other reasons to family concerns and things like that made me choose, that it was best to maybe be home a little bit more. And it was probably a good choice. I liked my years of service. Looking back on it, I liked it even more than I did at the time, because we were all so busy then. It was wartime, and there were a lot of stresses with wars and things like that, as I mentioned. Gone a lot, and emergency deployments and things like that. But looking back on it, it's good to be busy, mm-hmm. And I like that.
So you took an honorable discharge. What was an honorable discharge or an honorable retirement?
Well, it was, the way it worked, I guess, back then was I asked to just stand down, so to speak, is what they allowed us to do as pilots, and they put us in what's called a non-active reserve filing cabinet, which was called NARS. And that filing cabinet, when the first Gulf War was over, became really full. And so they wanted to basically get rid of people that weren't going to come back. And they asked me if I wanted to come back, and I said, no, I really don't. I'd like to just stay in what they call NARS. And they said, well, we need to get rid of people that aren't coming back. So I said, fine. Because originally when I went to NARS, it was they wanted to keep us in reserve, so to speak, so that if there was some sort of a crisis or something, that we would be available to the Air Force, we'd be an asset to them. I mean, after all, even back in 1969, they spent $1 million training each one of us, so they wanted to keep us, if they could, for any kind of future emergency. But after the first Gulf War, they had so many pilots all of a sudden that were getting out of the service and going to NARS that they needed to get rid of those ones. So I voluntarily took what's called a voluntary retirement. So I'm allowed to call myself U.S. Air Force Major Robert T. Brown retired if I want to.
So, can you tell me about your transition to your civilian life from the Air Force?
Well, it wasn't much of a transition. It was very quick. I was in the reserves locally at the local Air Force Base, McChord, and so then I was basically already home, so it wasn't like I had to pack up and leave or anything. And where I worked for the airline was at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, so I just quit driving south to McChord and just drove just like I used to SeaTac Airport. So it was a nice transition for me, and it gave me freed up an awful lot of extra time, and that was important to me at the time.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.